Hi, friends. Happy New Year, and welcome to Our Power is Within podcast. I'm your host, Chasmith, and my mission for this podcast is to inspire you to take your power back and to realize that you are the healer that you have been looking for all along. So, if you are enjoying the content from this podcast and the guests that I've had on the show, there are a few ways that you can help support future episodes in the new year. First, click the subscribe button, and that way you have every new episode waiting for you in your podcast library if you haven't done so already. Secondly, if you have not done so, please consider leaving a 5-star review or rating and then a quick review on Apple Podcast. Or you can share a favorite episode with a friend or on your social media and tag me at Our Power is Within. Lastly, at the bottom of the show notes, if you do feel called, you will find a direct link to a tip jar. So happy New Year. Yay. I hope that everyone is off to a wonderful start. And I hope that we do not lose momentum. We need to always remember the why. This week's challenge is actually inspired by an awesome event that I had the opportunity to participate in on Sunday, January 2nd, with Ashok Gupta, a previous guest on this show. If you have not listened to that episode, I will leave a link in the show notes. I highly recommend because he's just an amazing soul, truly. So anyhow, he had this New Year's inspirational event where he kind of walked us through explaining why New Year's resolutions generally do not work. And he explained this through using our different parts. It was really cute. I don't if you don't know who he is, he has these puppets that represent different parts of us, our internal family system. There's an episode on IFS also if you have not heard about this. So anyhow, he walks us through why these generally don't work and explains how we need to reframe our goals to include an emotion and a deeper purpose. So, some of the examples that he gave were instead of saying, I want to eat less sugar and more vegetables, you would say, I feel energized and invigorated from my new healthy eating habits. Or instead of saying, I want to meditate every day, you would say something like, I love feeling calm and centered every day. Does this make sense? Um, so yeah, I had a lot of fun going through these exercises with him and the whole group during this event. We focused on physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual goals. And so, based on this experience, I want to make this week's challenge for you to check in with your goals that you have created for yourself and see if they are simply action steps or is there an emotion felt behind them. And if they are just action steps at this point, that's fabulous because that's the first step. And now let's see if you can transform them so that there's more internal motivation. And if you do feel called to share any of your goals and what you will be up to in the new year, I would love to hear from you. So go ahead and shoot me an email or a DM. And speaking of goals, we all know by now that our like bodies and moving our bodies and movement is such an incredibly powerful tool in our journey to being our best, most true self. So, what does your current movement practice look like? In case you didn't know, I do offer weekly group movement classes and private movement training to help people who have or are experiencing um, have had in the past or who are experiencing chronic pain and illness. My goal is to help you establish a healthy, loving relationship with your body, with your potential, your movement and exercise habits, and current mind frame around it all. The first class is always free, so I would love to have you join, and there will be links to more details in the bottom of the show notes. So, our guest today, our first guest of 2022, is Caroline Van Kimmenade. She is the creator of The Happy Sensitive, which offers tools and coaching to help people shift from a highly sensitive to, you guessed it, happy sensitive. Caroline shares with us a little of her own story today and what led her into this work, the discoveries that she's had along the way, and tips for anyone listening that may consider themselves to be highly sensitive navigating this wonderful world. We chat about a lot of stuff today. It's a fun conversation, so I'm going to go ahead and get right into it. Caroline, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here with me and everyone listening today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I love when I get referrals, and I know that somebody sent you your name my way, and I looked it up right away, and I was like, oh, she's right. This is a great fit. So yeah, I thought that a great way to start, what I usually like to do is open the floor right away and let my guests kind of have that floor to talk about themselves and tell everyone listening a little bit about who you are and kind of where you find yourself at where you are today.
Yeah, great. So my journey started in 2009, and I had a lot of weird physical symptoms. I was tired. I was sleeping really badly. I had pain everywhere. You know, the kind of pain that you have when you have the flu, but it just lasts a few days. That lasted for years for me. I was really sensitive to everything. I was really overwhelmed very quickly. And there was just a whole bunch of symptoms that I didn't understand. I didn't understand what it was. I didn't understand what it meant. And leading up to that, I did have this experience and this realization of, wait a minute, I'm more sensitive than most people. I just had this way of knowing things about people. So I was a teacher. I was working at a university. And I knew stuff about my students. I knew stuff about my colleagues. And I would sometimes ask, you know, my other people, like, hey, did you notice this about this or this person? And they'd be like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, they look a bit ill or something. And they're like, no, that person's fine. And then, you know, a few days later, they would call in sick, stuff like that. And lots of times when I would think of something before someone said it, or I would say something and then someone else would say, oh, I was just thinking that, all these weird little coincidences. And I didn't really know what to make of it. And I basically burned out in my job due to all kinds of stresses that had accumulated in my life, my whole life, or for years. And once I got sick, I couldn't find any help. I couldn't find anyone who could explain to me what was going on or how to get better. And I wasted a lot of money on alternative healing that just didn't get me anywhere. And the regular doctor, he was just like, well, your thyroid's a bit off, but if it gets worse, we'll just cut it out. That's as much as he gave me, So it was a very lonely, scary journey. But what happened is, because I was a teacher and because I had learned how to do basic research, I turned my illness into my research project. And I came out of that thinking, wait a minute, I understand what's going on with me now. I understand what my sensitivity was about. I understand what that means and what I can do about it. And there's so much I learned, and I wanted to see if I could help other people with that. And that's how I started The Happy Sensitive. And that's the business that I have now. And I help women who are kind of taking everyone's problems home with them, who are very sensitive and aware of what's going on with everyone else. They're very empathic. And that's great, right? Especially for other people, but it can lead to all kinds of overwhelm and noticing a lot of things about people that you don't know what to do with. And I help them turn down the overwhelm and get back to their happy.
That's awesome. So did you actually ever end up needing like any coach or find anybody to kind of help you navigate through the healing of your physical symptoms, or was it a byproduct of the research and the personal work you were doing on yourself?
Yeah, so I couldn't really find anyone. I mean, I did, when I started my business, I got a business coach, and that was super helpful for just, creating a business. But for the health part and all my symptoms, I had to do it. I had to do it one step at a time. And it's not like I plucked everything out of thin air. I did take as many workshops as I could and read as much as I could and got books. And I really tried to learn from as many people as I could. But what I ended up doing is thinking, okay, wait, I've got to learn more about, for example, energy fields. What is that? How do I feel what that is? How do I figure out what I can sense about that? So then I would go to a pranic healing workshop, because that's what they focus on. And then a lot of what they taught wasn't ultimately helpful, but I did learn about energy fields and what I was sensitive to and what I could already naturally sense and what that meant. And so I just kind of, one step at a time, try to understand what is the next thing I need to figure out to understand what's going on with me and what do I need to heal. And a lot of that was also about stress. So my approach at some point was, when I really didn't know what was up or down, I thought, okay, I have all these weird symptoms, and the best I can do is just treat it like a stress disorder and just do what I can to get my stress levels down. So that was one of my focus points. But yeah, no, I didn't. I'm basically now the person that I wish I had when I went through all this.
At this point, though, I'm imagining you don't have all the symptoms that you suffered with in 2009.
No, thank God.
Yeah. And was there ever anything in particular that you connected dots or noticed, like, oh my gosh, that had a huge impact on my physical shifts?
Some things went slowly. So the first thing I did was set limits on what I was trying to do every day, and just try to stay within my very, very small limits of what I could manage without getting overwhelmed. So I was trying to just not add to the stress. And that really helped to take the fear down. So because for a while I was just terrified every single day. And I realized that terror was not, I was not afraid of a specific thing, but I did have a conversation with a psychologist that was helpful in this one regard, where she explained that some people, when they're really exhausted, they go into depression, and other people, when they're exhausted, they go into fear. And so I knew I was a fear type. So I knew my fear is connected to my exhaustion, so I need to spend less energy doing daily stuff to the point where the fear goes down. And that was one thing that was really helpful. And the other thing that was really, really crucial for me was understanding kind of the psychic part of what was happening with me, where I was literally picking up on what was going on with other people on a psychic level. And when I started to learn how to set boundaries with that, I suddenly noticed huge differences in my ability to have conversations with people without getting overwhelmed or without having weird symptoms afterwards. But that's a huge thing to unpack. But as a summary, that was that when I really understood how that worked and what that was and how to tone it down, that was a huge shift for me physically. And that's something I noticed with clients too, where if they have that going on, they might have been, trying to get massages and all kinds of medication and all kinds of healing practices done. But if they're actually carrying other people's energy in their body, and then we get that out, then they suddenly notice, like, oh my God, this thing that's been hurting for 10 years is now just fine, right? So that was a big thing for me. But I don't want to suggest that that's going on for everyone or that's the solution for everything. But for me, that was a huge, huge shift, where I realized my body is telling me through pain about things that I can't see, but that are happening and that I need to know about.
Okay, that's awesome. And so now that led you eventually into your business, the Happy Sensitive People, and you do primarily focus on women?
Yeah, so the Happy Sensitive, I have male clients from time to time, but I have noticed, when I started out, I thought it doesn't matter if they're male or female, like it's all the same, right? But then when I was working with clients, for several years, I really started to notice there is a difference between working with men or women. And what I recommend men do now mostly is like find a male coach, because men run up against different problems with their sensitivity. And one of the things that men struggle with is this sense of a male role model, right? Where they're all taught to be really tough and cool and masculine in a certain kind of way. And then they don't feel like they live up to that. And then they get really stuck with that. And of course, as women, we don't have that particular problem. So there's some things that men deal with that I think as women, I can kind of try to understand. Like I can try to help them with that, but I don't have that personal experience of what that's like.
Right. Yeah, that so makes sense. And it's really awesome that you were able to tap into that. And, because like there are some people that they'll just like take that person anyway without realizing their limitations on how much they'd be able to help somebody. And so I think that makes a great point, that having them to get a coach or somebody that's also a male for that role model is huge. So I mean, I feel like it's the same. Like I know for me, generally, when I'm looking for support, any kind of coach, in usually any capacity, I generally want to gravitate to a woman because I feel like we understand each other differently.
Yeah, totally. And we do things differently, and there are things that are, that we approach differently, or uh, we think about differently, or that are more important for us or less important for us. And yeah, all those little differences, they really add up.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so you have a business called the Happy Sensitive People. Could you tell us what is Happy Sensitive People?
Yeah, so just to clarify, it's the Happy Sensitive, right?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I have a Facebook project, the Happy Sensitive Project. I've given some things different names on social media sometimes, but yeah. So one of the big things I noticed when I was really ill, and once I started to piece together that I was highly sensitive, and also that I was an empath, and I started to really kind of research that, is all the whining online about how hard it is to be sensitive, and how terrible and how insensitive the world is. And I don't mind that kind of talk from people who are struggling, but it was also coming from people who consider themselves to be experts. And I was like, what is this? Like, this is ridiculous. And I never wanted to take that as the end goal. It's like, oh yeah, great. So now you know that you're highly sensitive. And so your life is just going to be overwhelming and stressful because the world doesn't get you, right? And I think that's really, really unhealthy. And so when I started my business, this was a really key idea for me, like going from highly sensitive to happy sensitive, because there's so much negativity attached to high sensitivity. And that's from within the group of highly sensitive people. And then from outside, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, you're sensitive, so you're like weak, right? So you've got that whole problem. So
Right.
I really wanted to like pull that idea into my branding.
Gotcha. So maybe for everyone who's listening, could you explain a little bit about some of the maybe attributes that somebody that might be listening would relate to in order to determine if they feel like they're a highly sensitive person?
Yeah, so a highly sensitive person is someone with a more sensitive nervous system, but that doesn't really tell you anything. All it tells you it's actually a natural trait. But what makes highly sensitive people different is that, first of all, empathy. And I really want to stress this because we all know sensitive people who have no empathy, right? And we call that narcissism. So let's just get that out of the way. So highly sensitive people have a lot of empathy, that it's easy for them to imagine what it's like for someone else. They're more attuned to, hey, what is that person going through? And noticing body language, noticing tone of voice. And so when you're highly sensitive like that, you're going to be picking up on more body cues of like what other people are going through and what they need. That's one thing. Another aspect is depth of processing. And what that means is that you're the kind of pause and check person. This is how Elaine Aron, she's a psychologist who pioneered this. That's what she calls it, pause and check. So it means that you take your time to really assess, how do I feel? What do I think? What's going on with this? So that in that sense, highly sensitive people are not the people who jump on a Twitter thread and like spew their opinion, right? They're the ones who are going to be like taking that in and be like, there's different opinions here. There's different approaches to this. Okay, how do I feel about this? And so they're often very able to see different points of view, but they also need more time to really get to what they feel and think about something. And then the last part of sensitivity is because you actually take in more stimulation from the world. So your senses are more, sensitive. But what that means is that for any situation where other people might notice 10 things, you notice 20 things. So you could say as your senses are more detail oriented, you pick up on more sights and sounds and smells. And so what that means is that you're able to get more information from small things, but you also get overwhelmed more quickly. I have a good example of this because when I was a student, I had to do a research project for a professor. And the original goal was to have at least 20 interviews. But when I got to about 9, I was exhausted. I was like, oh my God, because I would go and talk to people for hours and get so much information from one interview. And so I was talking to my professor. I was like, this is what I've got. And gosh, I need to do 11 more. And she said, actually, you can stop. Like 9 is enough because you got so much information from just these 9 interviews. You don't need to do 20. And that's a really great example of what it means to be highly sensitive, where like the benefits and the pitfalls at the same time. Like you get more information from less stuff, But also, if you're forced to just take on volumes of work or talk to lots of people or go to lots of places, you get stressed out and overwhelmed more quickly.
That makes sense. Okay. And so your goal in your business is, I mean, as you say, like you're helping people to shift from being highly sensitive. It's not that they're not going to be highly sensitive, but how can they be highly sensitive and happy?
Yes.
Yeah. Like how
Yes.
can they use this characteristic to their advantage, that in a way that supports them rather than as a disadvantage or a hindrance?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. And so then could you tell us then what would a happy sensitive person, like coming out the other end of, doing the work that it takes, whatever it is that they would do on their own, or the kind of work that you do with them, what would the transformation be like for somebody? Like what would be the other side?
Yeah. So the first thing is, and this is the hardest thing, is accepting that you are highly sensitive. And that seems kind of obvious, right? Like if you found a book and you're like, oh, I think I'm highly sensitive, you think you've accepted it. No, you have not necessarily accepted it. Because when you accept it, it means you accept all the traits that come with that. And it means you start living your life keeping that in the back of your mind, saying, oh, I do get overwhelmed more quickly. I'm going to have to take that into account. And I am trying to understand all points of view. So there are, that has benefits, but also if I jump into a really, really nasty Twitter thread, it's going to just make me really sad and depressed and overwhelmed because why are all these people yelling at each other, right? And so there's accepting the traits of that and the limitations. And then when you do that, you get to experience the benefits. Because the biggest problem for highly sensitive people is that we have a habit of overwhelming ourselves because we're trying to keep up with not the Joneses, but like the non-sensitive version of the Joneses, It's like, they don't have this problem. They don't need to do this way. They don't have, they don't get overwhelmed by this. So this inner, almost like this inner questioning of why do I get overwhelmed? How do I get over that? And so a lot of people are spending like way too much time trying to not be sensitive. And this is the first place you need to start and say, wait, I am this way. I need to really embrace it. I need to understand it better for myself and then work with it instead of working against it. And for some people, working with it is pretty straightforward. And for some people, it's very complicated because there's all these very specific intuitive sensitivities that they have that they need to learn to understand and unravel one step at a time.
Could you talk a little bit about what you mean by intuitive sensitivities?
Yeah, so this is often conflated online, right? So there's a lot of people who say highly sensitive people are empaths, or they're all super intuitive, but there's really a difference. So highly sensitive people, being a highly sensitive person, is about your body. It's about what your senses pick up on. But there is a significant percentage of highly sensitive people who also have intuitive gifts, and they don't necessarily know that. Like when I was working at university and I just knew stuff about people, that was not from body language per se. Sometimes on some other level, I was picking up on stuff. And the complicated thing about intuitive sensitivities is that there's different ways that this can work. So it could be that, how do I explain this in like a nutshell? It could be that you're spending too much time trying to figure people out, and your intuition is feeding you information from trying so hard. And for some people, trying so hard, they try so hard, they almost like leave their body and they kind of go flying around in a way. That's a particular kind of intuition, but that's actually not healthy in the long run. So that is something that often comes from stress and worry and like wanting to protect yourself and wanting to know what's going to happen. But it's possible. And the thing is, when you are more sensitive, you often have this ability to also tune into things on a more psychic level, meaning what people are feeling without telling you, what people are feeling without saying it. Because whatever people are going through, yeah, it's present in their own body, but it's also present in a kind of shared energy soup. And when you're highly sensitive, there might be ways that you have access to that you don't realize. And so I kind of, I touched upon when people try to figure stuff out and end up leaving their body. That's when you can get very sensitive to all kinds of information about other people. But also there's people who just naturally have this ability even when they stay put in their body, and it just kind of comes towards them. This information just kind of finds them. And this can be very overwhelming too. So even though intuition is really, really cool, what I think one of the problems with it is that a lot of places online, people are presenting intuition like it's the end all be all of some kind of personal development, like you want to be more intuitive. And actually what I help people with is how to be less intuitive so that you just feel calmer and you're not distracted by all kinds of things that are not your business.
Okay. So intuitive for their own well-being, but not to everyone and everything around them.
Yes, yes. So
Because
that
we
the
want to be intuitive. We don't want to be less intuitive for ourselves. We want to actually connect to that inner voice to guide ourselves, but without all the noise and distraction from everything else around.
Yes, that's exactly it. Because when you become too intuitive about everyone else, that information starts drowning out what you need to know about yourself. And then
Mm-hmm.
people get really lost, and then they end up putting the cart in front of the horse. They try to help everyone else, but they are completely lost themselves and they don't realize it. And you can end up feeling alone, exhausted, tired, really good at helping people, but somehow you feel really stuck.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, I mean, I'm sure that you can speak to this. It it sounds like it could be maybe one of those situations where you said the information where it's like things happen in life or you're around people or you're in places and there's just things you know and you don't know how you know or why you know, but you know. And it's like, what do you even do with that information? Because if you just tried telling most people, they want concrete, logical explanations why. And you're like, I don't know. I just know. I know. I just know. I don't know why I know or how I know, but I know.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that can be distracting. I can see your point how if you're focused on all these other things and you want to then help other people or help bigger situations, but then you're like, oh, but what about me? And I don't really know what direction I'm going.
Yes, it can become this endless to-do list of wait, that person needs this. I don't know how I know this, but this person wants this. And then your to-do list gets so incredibly long, you never get around to doing stuff for yourself. And
Mhm.
that kind of intuition, it's heralded a lot online, unfortunately, but that is not healthy. That's not what you want. You want to have enough intuition about yourself and maybe about your surroundings to really just be living your own life and helping people in the way that you choose to, but you don't want to be forced into something that is just overwhelming and you don't know what to do with it. And the cool thing about intuition is that even though it feels very when you're going through something, and I went through this for years where I was like, what am I feeling and why and how do I know this? And it feels very confusing and overwhelming. But ultimately, your intuition is an extension of what you once upon a time decided to make important. And so there are lots of ways you can actually get a handle on that, and you can pull your intuition back and say, actually, I don't need to know about all that. And I don't need to be in the know about horrible things that are going to happen on the planet in 2 months somewhere that keep me up at night, because what's the point? I can't do anything about it. I don't even know where it's going to happen. And I had a client who had that experience. She always knew about disaster striking and she was accurate about it, but she had just enough information to make her really stressed and not enough information to actually share anything useful with anyone about it.
Right.
So I worked with her to tune that down so she could just sleep and not know because it wasn't useful.
Hmm. Yeah, this makes sense. And so we need to tune down that, but tune up the connection we have to our own internal compass, in a
Yes.
sense. And that's something I actually hear all the time in the healing space. The question, how do I reconnect to my intuition, my internal compass, my voice of reason, my voice, the voice that's going to speak softly to me and guide me on the path that aligns to my soul's journey, and a lot of people, especially in the chronic illness community, I hear that often where we're like, hey, I feel really disconnected to that internal compass, that internal voice for myself. Do you have suggestions um, for people who want to reconnect with their own internal compass?
Yeah, tons. And first off, I'd say it's a really good place to be in when you realize that that's the problem, because a lot of people will never find out. So that's
Right.
like,
That's a good point.
little pat on the back moment, like, hey, you got here and now you have stuff to learn, but you know that that's what you need. The second thing is you need to make space for not knowing and just having time to just check in with how am I feeling, what's going on in my body today, without that pressure of, I need to know right away what to do about it. Because when you put pressure on yourself, you're not going to get the answers. And your body communicates with you in a very different way than a book or something rational. Your body communicates with a vague sensation and maybe an image or a memory that pops up. And one thing I found really useful when I started on this journey was this idea of the inner child and inner child healing. And really imagining that you're trying to get back in touch with a part of yourself that is young and scared and confused, and that you've actually abandoned for many years. So she's not going to be like, super happy to see you. She might be happy, but also a little bit skeptical. So if you imagine trying to reconnect with someone that you've abandoned and you want to get that relationship back on track, it's going to take some time to win that person over and show them that you're there for them now. And so the most important thing when you're trying to get that connection back is you need to show up for yourself every day and create a space where you just try to listen. And listening doesn't mean you get answers. It just means you start noticing, what's going on with me today? And how are different parts of my body feeling? And even if you don't know, that's okay. I've worked with clients where their first sensation was just, I feel icky and I don't know why. And I don't know what emotion that could even be. But just noticing how they were before they started doing that and noticing how they were after. Before, they would be dissociated, half outside of their body, completely just like not grounded. And just when they started asking, what's going on in my body, and just noticing I feel weird and icky, instantly that would ground them. Even though they didn't have any answers, right? They had nothing for their brain to like work with, but just acknowledging that sensation. So it's kind of understanding that that's the journey you're on, and there's going to be a lot of things that you don't really know what they mean, and you want to just create that daily space to just say, that's okay. I'm just trying to reconnect, right? I'm not trying to make sense of this little girl. I just want to hear what she wants to share with me. And maybe she'll be quiet for a long time, and I'll just sit there and be with her.
I love that you bring this up. And that's so true, that especially that last point about maybe she will be quiet, and maybe, that's a good reminder for us to be patient. And that means that if like for a week we say, I showed up every day and I didn't hear anything still, I can see how, I can see like the mind wanting to create a story about that and then decide it's not working and give up or quit. And maybe it needed to be 2 weeks or 3, like rather than put a number on it.
Totally. And you also want to guard against trying to just do it in one go. There are people I cannot help. And one of the, let's say, kinds of people that I can't help are the people who say, okay, I will block half of my day to do this inner practice because you told me so. And then they like try really hard for 4 hours, and then they don't get any answers that they like. And then they, like you say, they say, well, this is not working and it sucks. And then they just kind of stop everything. And I always try to explain to them, like, it's not about doing it once. It's better to just take 5 minutes every day. Like if you imagine a relationship with a little kid, what would you rather have? That you're there for her 4 hours once in a blue moon, or that you're there for her at least 5 minutes every day where you really listen to her and pay attention? Like what feels safer?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. And I love that you brought up, you're saying, even if, cause I can, hear, my own excuses in the past. And I can imagine there's somebody like, well, I don't have time for that. And you just made it like, hey, it just has to be 5 minutes a day. Like, doesn't have to be this big thing where it's a half a day of your life every day or an hour that you're spending time doing this.
Yeah, exactly. And there are people who you come up with reasons why they can't even spend 5 minutes a day. And if that's going on, there's usually just a huge fear. They're afraid of what they're going to find. But to that, I would say, like whatever the mind's afraid of, it's already happened. It's already there. And it's better to know about it than pretend it doesn't exist and then get hit over the head with it, out of left field one day.
Oh, that's such a good point. It's already there. So the very thing that we're afraid of is already there anyways.
Yeah. Because how else would you know to be afraid of it?
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Oh, that's so true. Good point. Okay. On your website, you do talk about someone's language of sensitivity. Could you share with me what you mean by that?
Yes. And I'm actually going to change that going forward. I think it's incredibly confusing for people. But what I was trying to attempt with that is that there is your sensitivity and the sensations that you have that make no sense, that feel like I'm just overwhelmed and I'm just hurting and I'm just in pain. Like I was just in pain and my body was saying, this hurts, this hurts, this hurts. If I had treated that like a medical disorder and just tried to shush it, I never would have discovered what that pain was trying to alert me to, because there was a lot I needed to learn about how my body works and how my intuition works and how my psychic abilities work. And the only way my body had to talk to me about that was through pain, exhaustion, all kinds of symptoms. And so I think this is a really key thing, because it goes against how we're taught to look at our body, right? Like kind of Western medical science is very much like, oh, your body is malfunctioning. We need to get it back in line. And what I learned is like, my body never actually malfunctioned. My body was the one honest part of my life who was like consistent about telling me there is something wrong. There is something you need to look at. There's something you need to deal with, and it's urgent. That's why it hurts so much. And I'm not saying diseases don't exist, but there are a lot of stress-related disorders that people can have where you need to go in and take those symptoms seriously and dive into seeing it as a language, but it's a language you don't speak yet. So if someone's yelling at you in Japanese, you're just like, I'm sorry. But it does mean something. It's just that you haven't learned the language yet. And so this is one of the things I do with my clients. It's like, what language is their body trying to speak to them? But they don't understand it's a language, they don't know what the words mean. And decoding that and realize, for example, for some clients, when they are dealing with a situation that they're afraid of dealing with and they're terrified of it, that might show itself as fatigue. So it's not that, I'm not saying that all fatigue is cannot be a medical thing, but there's all kinds of ways that when you're not emotionally connected to yourself enough to hear the language and the message directly, your body is going to speak to you through physical symptoms. And
Right.
if you just treat that as I need an energy drink, you're never going to figure out what it's about. But if you start to notice, like, you know what, every time I need to go and talk to that person, I have this fatigue in advance. There's a pattern there. What is that about, right? It's not just your random fatigue. It's not your body malfunctioning. It's your body trying to tell you something. So I think that is really key, and it just completely changes the relationship with any disease you have, any way you have of looking at your life and realizing, I'm not malfunctioning, I'm not a failure. This is just the best my body has got to try to tell me about something that's going on.
Gotcha. And so in a sense, everybody's language could be different.
Yeah. And then, so this is a very individual process. So when I meet someone, I'm not going to say like, well, fatigue means this and that pain over there means that, but I really spend time trying to get to know them. And I start explaining, like, how do we track this? How do we figure out what this is really about for you? And it does become clear over time. But yeah, everyone's body is different. So it's not like you just draw a map and just, create this linear translation chart. Like, these things here mean that. I know it's something that is also something it's quite common in the spiritual world to have these graphs and these overviews. This color means that, this body part means that. And I just have found that to not be that simple at all. It might be an interesting starting point, something worth considering, but a lot of this is very individual.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. What are some steps that somebody can take on their own? Like, say there's somebody listening right now and they do resonate with the idea that they might be highly sensitive. And as they listen to like the kind of like more negative attributes, and they're like, oh my gosh, this really resonates for me. I feel the overwhelm. I feel like I've been fighting against it. And they really do want to create that shift and learn how to live with it in harmony, live with this as a gift. What are ways that they could like start to begin to create that shift internally if they, aren't at a place where they're ready to work with a coach?
So one of the things that really helped me was to stay curious. So taking on this approach of curiosity. And the great thing about curiosity is it doesn't judge. Curiosity doesn't say this is good or bad. It just says, interesting. I wonder what that's about. And if you can take on that attitude, anything, and I did this with a lot of really painful experiences I had where I was like, I'm hurting so bad. It's like, okay, interesting. What is this about? What can I learn about this? What can I try? If you take on that kind of attitude, it will bring you to new ideas and new insights and new things you can try. I think a really key thing when you're struggling with kind of dealing with and accepting that you're highly sensitive is all these judgments from so many people that you're weak and you're defective and you're just exaggerating. Like my family, when I got sick, they were like, "Oh, you're just making this up. It's ridiculous. You're not really sick." Like, what? There's a lot of people who will not understand, and inevitably you take some of that on board and you judge yourself with it. And so it's really important to create a kind of a practice and a mindset for yourself where you try to stay out of that and you just get curious. You just want to learn. You're like, my body is trying to teach me something. My body's trying to show me something. My life is trying to show me something. I don't know what it is, but isn't that interesting? There's something I can learn here.
Are there any good questions that we can ask ourselves in that curiosity?
One of the really big things that I find, again, with clients, especially the ones who feel really stuck, is you need to ask yourself, how do I feel?
Okay.
So not what should I do or what is the right thing to do here or how do I make myself blah, 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 but just how do I feel? And then taking time to just really let yourself be that way, feel that way, and get curious about it. And it's a hard, it's easy to give that as a tip, but in practice, when you try, there's going to be all kinds of resistance. So when I can't go through that process with somebody together, all I can really say is make time to check in with your inner child, to ask yourself, how do I feel? And be curious about what you're going through, as in maybe it's not what you think it is. Maybe it's not what people say it is. Maybe it's something else. If you can keep that door open, you're going to find, new things and new options and new things you can try that get you one step further.
Yeah. Okay. So really, it sounds to me like staying curious and then combining that with that willingness to set that time aside, even if it is just 5 minutes a day, to connect with the inner child and ask, how do I feel?
Yeah. Yeah.
Over and over and over again.
Yeah. And of course it's going to be, it can be hard to stay curious because curiosity puts you in this place of not knowing. And a lot of people are terrified of that. And all I can say is, you know what, if knowing stuff was going to get you out of this predicament, it would have already. So,
right.
Whatever you think it's not helping. So it's better to be curious and open to, maybe it's not what I thought. Maybe this is not going to go the way that I fear it will. Maybe there's other options. Just, that maybe. Just going to back to that honest human place of there's so much that we don't know, because there is. I find that to be a very healing, supportive, positive place. So even the scariest things where people are like, yes, but we know this for sure. Yeah, maybe. Maybe. There's so much that even, when the dominant paradigm is that we know this for sure and this is 100% what needs to be done, then, 10 years later, 20 years later, they find out that's actually not true.
Right.
So just taking that on board from the get-go,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. How often has that happened in life when we learn something and then we feel so certain and we just know that's absolutely it. And like you said, time goes by and we continue to evolve, we continue to learn, and we're like, oh, maybe that wasn't true.
Yeah. Like, oops.
I love curiosity. I think it's one of the most beautiful characteristics that we can possess and take on and practice and embody next to gratitude. I feel like when I'm in a state of curiosity, I just feel like my life makes so much more sense and things flow and I'm happier and more connected. It's when I slip out of that and forget to be curious that other stuff tends to show up.
Totally. And I think curiosity too, it can really just take you out of that painful reality that you might be in without disconnecting in an unhealthy way. But curiosity is able to look further and look beyond it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like When we can be curious, especially about ourselves, really about everything, but especially with ourselves, we start to discover, belief systems that we had that weren't even ours, but we were attached to them and gripping them for dear life. And you can just start to peel back layers of like ways that you've been that aren't actually authentic for you or who you were really meant to be. And you can see how you might have just take stuff on from other people around you and childhood and growing up and all that stuff.
Totally. And, one thing I find time and time again that my body does is when I am spending a little bit too much time in, let's say, the just of doing stuff in the world, but that's really something I need to attend to on the inside, my body will often jam me into a corner one way or another. So I'll just end up in this position where I feel like I can't really do anything except turn inside today. And it might just last a day, right? It might just be that day I feel really weird and off. And I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to rest and turn inside. And then when I do, I'm so glad I did because there's something I needed to look at and learn and consider. And we can waste so much time running around out there trying to fix things that really we need to attend to on the inside.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And we can be out there trying to like control rather than be curious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying we should never intervene in anything, but if trying to intervene comes from a lack of understanding of yourself and a lack of understanding what is really at stake, then no matter how much control you get, it's never going to be enough and it's never going to actually solve the problem for you. And you're always going to feel like there's still something really wrong. And one of the scary things about that is that you see some people do that where they're just completely disconnected from their inner self and they're living in this illusion where they just try to get more and more control over others, and then when it's not turning out the way they think it will, their solution is, I need to get more control. That's how dictatorships are born, and that's something you can see on the micro scale, and it can develop in lots of different ways. It can develop in a kind way where you're just taking too much responsibility for people's trouble. But it can also develop in a creepy way where you're just trying to make people do stuff. But really what's going on is you need to be with your inner fear and see what that's really about or something like that.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. What do you feel like have been some of the gifts, like throughout the years that you've been doing this practice with clients? What have been some of the gifts that you've seen people enjoy um, through the process of, shifting their relationship with their sensitivity, and maybe aside from like the, um, you know, curiosity or the intuition?
Yeah, so when you go through this whole process, you get to know yourself better, you understand how you work. A few things happen. One, you're going to be way more efficient. You can get way more done with much less time. Second, you're going to feel like you're on purpose, like you're doing the thing you actually want to do because you now have a direct access to yourself, and you can check in with yourself. It's like, is this what I really want to do? And so you feel way more aligned and supported and safe in the world because you're building on your own foundations as opposed to everyone else's foundations. It's going to be easier for you to just go your own way and just say no to things that are going to be stressful and overwhelming for you because you trust yourself, because you've learned how to discern what is what. So trusting yourself doesn't mean you randomly accept every thought you have as truth, right? I think sometimes people misconstrue it as that. But trusting yourself means that you have the processes and tools to really dig in and understand, where do I stand on this? What do I need to do? So it just comes with a different kind of attitude in the world. And it's really amazing what it's like you start living from the inside out instead of the outside in. And living from the inside out is a lot less work. And it's easier for things to show up for you and to get the right things in your life rolling when you're really grounded and who you are and who you want to be is like the same person, as opposed to who you are and who you want to be are like miles apart. Then your whole life is just constantly going wonky because you're trying to do two things at the same time that are potentially opposites. So yeah, your life goes more smoothly. You start to feel that you're in the right place at the right time, even if maybe you're not sure what you're doing exactly that day. But there's just this sense of inner guidance and inner clarity and inner peace. Even though, and in this interview, I'm definitely nervous, right? So I'm not saying you're always going to be super chill, but there is a different kind of relationship with yourself and the world that develops. There is so much less I stress about now than I used to. And I feel so much more supported by the world as a whole, regardless of what specific people may or may not do.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like a nice place to be. And I love how you were talking about it's like bridging that gap of who you are and who you want to be, right? Because isn't that like such a common theme in the growth that kind of personal development world is like, I know who I am, I know where I want to be, and it's like this big gap, and we're trying to figure out how to get there and how to create that and how to step into that person.
Yeah, and you got to make sure that that person is actually possible for you, because if you're trying to be the opposite of who you really are because you don't like yourself, you're always going to be struggling. And that's that acceptance piece that we talked about in the beginning. Who you want to be needs to build on your natural traits. And this is one of the hardest things to figure out, like what is a natural trait and what is something that can actually change. And, like I said before, this is something I have different ideas about than many people in my industry. When people say, oh, high sensitivity is just overwhelming, I say, no. High sensitivity means that you're picking up on more things. So you need to be smart about how you deal with that. And if you're smart about that and you know how to manage that, it's not going to be more overwhelming. But if you try to do things in the way that works for less sensitive people, you are going to be overwhelmed.
Right. Yeah. Trying to be like how somebody else is doing it that's different than you, and rather than embracing your uniqueness and like we've already talked about, kind of finding a way to align to it and work with it rather than against it.
Yeah, and that shows up in like really. I mean, I know personal development is always a little bit vague. Like, what's the benefit of that? But it shows up in all kinds of little ways. There's so many things that I do in my life now that I really do it. I do it my own way, which means it's less stressful. It's more productive. It's more fun. And my own way can look really weird to other people. Or like, why do you do it that way? Well, because if I don't do it that way, I'm going to get stressed and overwhelmed and confused, and it's not going to be fun for me. So I do it this way. And when you really embrace who you really are and you understand who you are, it's going to ripple out to all aspects of your life, how you do everything. And you're not going to be so apologetic or worried about what other people are going to think about it. You're just going to be like, yeah, this is how I do it, period.
Right.
And most people don't care. Like, if it's working, if it's successful, people don't really care how you do it. So.
Oh, that's so true. I love that too. I love how you pointed out you're like, yeah, well, I do it this way because this way is less stress, and and so this is the way I'm going to do it. I think it's also great when we can get to that point where we also don't feel like we need to give people a reason, like, no, I'm not available for that. No, I don't want to do that. I don't need to give you a lengthy explanation as to why.
Exactly. It saves so much time. Yeah. And so much inner doubting, because a lot of times sometimes you need to explain why you do things, right? But ultimately, you can still explain something while having that attitude of, this is what I do and this is why I do it, and I know that this is what works for me. That doesn't mean you never change. It doesn't mean you don't learn things, but it means you don't need other people's permission. Because if you're looking for people's permission, you're never going to get it. They're always going to want you to do things their way, because that's going to be more affirming for them. And then you're just running around, that person says do this, that person says do that. I think a great example of that is when I get male contractors in my home when there's something that needs to be done. They're always criticizing the work that the other guy did. Always. Whatever the other guy did was like completely idiotic. And why did he do it that way? And I just started to realize that's what they will do. That's part of their self-confirming language, that their way is the best way. But it doesn't really mean anything. And that's what a lot of people will do when you ask them, is it okay if I do it this way? Whereas if you just go and you're like, hey, I'm going to do this now. They're like, okay. And then before they even have time to think about what they want you to do, or if they, like it that you do it that way, you've already done it, and it's not really a problem.
Yeah. This conversation, this part reminds me of a quote, and I'm not even going to try to say the quote because I will mess it up tenfold, but it's by who is it? The guy who wrote The Alchemist.
Oh, yes, I know who you mean.
I don't know why it's on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, he's got one of those names that it's not that difficult.
Coelho something. I don't know. have read that book 100 times, but I've also read all the other books and they're fantastic. But anyways, there's a quote in one of the books and it talks about this. It talks about how ultimately we need other people to believe the exact same thing we believe, or we need people to do things the way that we think that they should be done or that is right or proper, because it helps us to validate our belief. It helps us to feel better about what we stand in as truth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when you take that to the extreme, that turns into bullying.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so funny you brought that up about contractors. It's kind of like, it's so many different things. You see that dynamic play out in the world in so many ways where it's like, well, I'm going to talk crap about what they did to make me look better. And I'm like, can we all just talk about what we can bring to the table and not like have to bash the, anything else to like make and justify what we're saying is better?
Oh,
Like,
totally.
just let's talk good. Let's just talk the good. Like, what can I do for you? Or what do I believe? Like, rather than why the other thing is flawed.
Yeah, and sometimes to be true to your direction, you do have to say, I disagree with this or I disagree with that
Yeah.
stance. But it doesn't mean you have to go bashing people and make that your end all be all.
Yeah. 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 That'd be nice. That'd be a nice place. And it starts from within. So we've got to start with that for showing up that way for sure. What offerings do you actually have? What do you have group programs or just one-on-one? Like how does your program work?
Yeah, so I have a few different things that I do. I have a few one-on-one programs. One is specifically for empaths, and it's called From Suffering Sponge to Sensitive Savant, where I work with somebody one-on-one and also check with them first if that's really what's going on for them, right? Because you need to know for sure that that's the overwhelmed problem you're having. I have a program called No to Narcissist, which is about healing from narcissistic abuse, because I found over time that a lot of people who struggle with their sensitivity struggle because they had parents who were pretty narcissistic, who were constantly saying, your emotions are bullshit, you're too sensitive, blah, 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 blah. And so then a big part of what stopping you from just accepting who you are as like a valuable, worthy thing is that voice of your parents in your head, right? And you need a way to kind of get that out of your system. So that's what I do with people in that program. And I do classes sometimes, live classes. Those are the kind of the only group offering that I have. So they're maybe an hour or 2 hours, and they have a very specific topic. And it's great to have questions from all kinds of people in there. And I have something called the Happy Sense of Library, and that's where I put all my recordings and specific podcasts and action steps so that people have a self-study resource. Because I know when I started, sometimes the self-study resources are the most supportive, because when you're overwhelmed and stressed out, you can just pace it and you can just pick and choose like what is going to be helpful for you without feeling like someone is assessing you. Or sometimes you can get very self-conscious, and it's nice to just hear something in a kind of anonymous way and be like, well, I'll just take from that what I like. So those are my three big offerings. And I'm not doing group programs for any kind of big transformational work right now, specifically because I work with sensitive people who are going to be sensitive to all the other participants as well. So it kind of defeats the purpose to get people to lessen overwhelm, but then bring them all together and get them all worrying about each other and picking up on stuff from each other. That's not going to help. So I just do that work one-on-one. Yeah.
That's so true. Such a good point. In your experience, I know it's probably really individualistic, but if you did have to kind of guess, how long do you feel like it usually takes people to like work with you before they really start to feel more connected and like they're actually experiencing the positive shifts they're looking for?
So to feel more connected, it only takes a few months. And it depends, of course, on what somebody's doing as homework as well. And I also want to point out, when I have sessions with clients, I don't have sessions very often. Depending on the program, it'll be once a month or maybe once every 2 weeks at most, because
Okay.
I work with people really in depth, and then they get homework, and then the idea is that they practice stuff on their own, and we kind of assess what's working, what's not, what was easy, what was hard. But yeah, usually within a few months, people will start to feel like, oh, sometimes what they were struggling against, what they were trying to reach that they could never reach, they realize it's not really what they wanted. And they're like, oh, well, that's one problem solved, but they never got that interconnection going enough to really realize that. And even for the people who are very, very sensitive to all kinds of psychic stuff, usually within a few months, they start to feel really way more empowered about that. They're like, wait a minute, I'm not picking up on all this stuff anymore. I still, it's still affecting me in certain places, but it's much, much less now. I feel less overwhelmed, less headaches or less tiredness, sleeping better, all those kinds of things. So yeah, I'm not going to say that, you're going to be done in like a few months, but you definitely start noticing the shifts. And I would also say, if you're working with somebody for several months and you notice no difference, please quit. Because, if somebody understands what you're going through, of course, they're not going to be able to solve all your problems within a few months necessarily, depending on what you've got going on. But you should start to feel better in some significant ways that you can notice or that your partner can notice. Sometimes I have clients and their husband is like, you're different. You're so much less stressed. And they don't even realize it yet, but their partner notices, right? But there's got to be a way that it's clear that something good is happening. Because I have worked with people in the past for sometimes like half a year and nothing shifted. And they kept telling me, yeah, I guess you just need some more sessions, No, you can start to see differences in a few months. Yeah.
Okay. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. And how can people connect with you?
Yeah, so the best way is through my website, thehappysensitive.com. And I've got lots of articles there. All my services are on there. It's all on the website.
Are you on any social media, or you kind of say no to that?
I am, but I'm actually debating. I left Facebook. I had a pretty big Facebook page, but Facebook completely killed my traffic at some point, where they want you to pay for everything. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to pay for people to see my, uplifting posts like on a daily basis, just so they can, just the whole mechanism is just like, no. And I'm thinking about leaving Instagram and Twitter too. It's just, I really like writing. I like creating videos. I'm on YouTube. I'm going to stay on YouTube. I send out newsletters. I write articles. At some point, it's also, what's enough? I like trying new things, but I realize social media is just never really gelled with me that much. And it might be time to leave, but I don't know yet.
Oh, look at you. I love that. You might be honoring a boundary that you might need to set.
Yeah.
Are you on the YouTube as The Happy Sensitive as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So we'll find lots of articles and ways to connect with you through your website. I know I saw on there myself that you can sign up for the library that you talked to us about. And you have a lot of blog, and they're nice because they're not really long. So they're good for people who don't like lengthy blogs.
I have some very lengthy ones too, though. But yeah, I have some shorter ones too.
Well, they're intermixed then. There's a little bit for everyone. I know that when I get to writing, it's like really wordy. So I can probably lose people's attention quick. And then I'll throw the link to the website, obviously, in the show notes. And I'll make sure to throw a link to the YouTube in the show notes too, for people who love doing, more watching the videos and having the visual experience. And I guess I would want to ask you one more question.
Okay.
If you were, I ask this question to everybody, by the way, it's my $1 million question. If you, for the rest of your life, were only allowed to share one message with the world, what would you want that single message to be?
Oh God, as someone who writes long posts and is very thorough.
Right?
Like where every sentence you say, yeah, but except when,
You're making me pick a favorite. What?
It's going to be really vague. Something like connect with all parts of yourself. And then I'm just going to have people just, it's going to be like a Zen statement. You're like, what does that mean? And then they just can like research that the rest of their lives. If I can only share one thing, connect with all parts of yourself.
It's my first Zen statement. Caroline, is there anything else that you feel passionate about sharing that maybe I didn't ask you about that you'd still like to share?
Oh, that's a great question. I think this has been a really great interview and you've asked a ton. I always do this. I'll just take a moment and just kind of check with my intuition to see if something bubbles up. So
absolutely.
Oh, okay. So for some reason I'm getting something on fear. So highly sensitive people are more susceptible to fear in some ways because of how our sensitivity works. When anybody is afraid, they're going to be more sensitive, right? Because their senses go on high alert, and their senses are like, I gotta hear the tiger when it's coming, right? That's what your body does. This dynamic is really important for highly sensitive people to understand, though, because your regular high sensitivity is kind of at that alertness level where it would be for most people if they were very stressed. And so when other people see you, they're going to see you as an anxious person, even if you don't really feel like you're an anxious person. Because compared to where they're at, you would be what they would be like if they were super anxious. And I know that sounds really negative, but it's an important thing to understand, because it means that when we highly sensitive people get stressed and fearful, we become doubly sensitive. But sometimes that is construed as a spiritual awakening, and most of the time it's not. You're just stressed out of your mind. So boundaries are super important for us, like grounding practices, relaxation practices. But I for some reason, I wanted to connect these dots that it rubs me the wrong way when you've got people saying, oh, my senses just suddenly opened up. And then I hear their story and I'm like, yeah, you were stressed out of your mind. You were probably dissociating. You ended up in the energy soup because you just left your body. That is not healthy. That's not healthy intuition. It's not something to celebrate. It's a warning sign. It's like, wait a minute, I need to ground and relax and slow down and get into my body again. And this is a mechanism. When you're highly sensitive, you need to understand how that works.
Okay. Good tips. That's good for people to know for sure, because then I think it's another one of those things where that information helps us learn how to leverage and to align and to work with who we are, rather than trying to, like, we already talked about, deny it or be different than, or just try to fight it in a sense.
Yeah, or even like try to like push it further. We're like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm super intuitive now. This is great. You are stressed out of your mind. Your body's falling apart. Like, please don't go down this path, So yeah.
Yeah. Well, because once we understand these, then we can learn how to support our system.
Yeah, and it shows you where to draw the line. But I think this can be very confusing to know. Like, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Do I need to draw the line here, or do I need to continue? And so this is just one of those very big ones where it's very easy to go down what I think is the wrong path, because people are congratulating you on how intuitive you suddenly are. And you're feeling like you're falling apart on the inside. You are falling apart. Like, please do something about the stress in your life and find ways to chill and relax and, like, get support. Because then you've got like a double whammy of, if you're the kind of person who's looking after everyone else and you're doing fine doing that, and you're suddenly like way more intuitive, then you've got the people you're taking care of are like, yeah, you're doing great. You're taking care of us. And the intuitive folks, the gurus, are like, hey, you're super intuitive. Cool, man. So then you just kind of feel like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is a good thing. But if on the inside you feel like something's wrong and you're falling apart and you're stressed out, or you're not okay, this is how all of that connects, and this is why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds to me like what you're saying too is that if we are a highly sensitive person, grounding might be very valuable for us. Grounding.
Yes. And that's like a huge topic, because often when people talk about grounding, they're like, you have to imagine connecting to the earth and all that. And really, grounding is more about just being present in your body, and also doing things you love. The best way to ground: do things you love, do things you like, do things that make you want to be here.
I love that. Do things. I never heard of it that way. I was definitely, I don't connect very well for me when people are like, oh, imagine this cord or something going into the earth. And I'm very much connected to nature and love nature and the earth and all that. But I don't have that visual capacity to imagine like that level of grounding. But I very much relate to grounding in the sense of like coming back into my present moment in my body, orienting, being aware, noticing my breath. But I love this too, to ground by doing things you love. That's one way I haven't heard of it explained, and I really like that.
Yeah, because this is something anybody can do. Like, it's easy, because the whole point, like, when you need to ground, it's because you're not present. Why are you not present? Because you're not enjoying yourself. You're like, I want to get out of here. So if you can find something that you like doing, that you love doing, boom, you're back here. And if you cannot think of anything that you love doing, that's your task.
That's where you start.
Try things, right? Try things that are not about helping anyone, not about making the world a better place. You just like doing them for the sake of it.
Yes. I love that. If you can't think of anything you love, that's the work. Start there. And I love that you also mentioned not about trying to like fix the world or anything, like, but literally just doing something for the sake of it,
Yeah.
for the enjoyment.
You don't want to know how many conversations I've had where I'm like, okay, you got to do something you love. And they're like, I like volunteering at the hospital. It's like, let's do that again. Right. Let's go back. Something that you just like doing for yourself that doesn't help or heal or, fix anything. And you don't even have to be good at it. You just got to, for some weird reason, like doing it. That's what we're looking for. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to ask you one more question.
Okay.
And we're going to make this the personal example question. What do you do for the sake of it that you love?
One of the things I really love is biking. I always have since a little kid. I've always loved biking. There's all these photos of me like on my bicycle, like my tongue out of my mouth, just looking really concentrated and just having a great time. And I still love biking. It's one of those weird things. I've tried so many things in the course of my life that some things are interesting for a while. But, I even went surfing a few years ago and I just hated it. And I just rented a bicycle instead. And I was like, oh, this is great. So the bicycle was crappy. It was like half falling apart, but I just had a great time. So for me, definitely biking.
So
Yeah.
biking, like leisurely bicycling, not
Yes.
like going 60 miles on like one of those road bikes or something.
Oh, heck no. No. And I take lots of, yeah, no, I take lots of breaks. So I do go long distances. I like to just kind of travel with my bike and just say, I'm going to go over there and see how far I can get. But I take lots of breaks, and when I find a beautiful spot, I just sit there for a while and just kind of relax and take that in. So yeah, I'm not going for like the record at all. No.
Gotcha. I love bicycle riding too. It makes me so happy. There's something liberating and freeing about it.
Right? So much
I don't
better
know.
than a car.
Oh,
Yeah,
it just
for
makes
me.
me smile. I love it. All right. I love that. That's a great way to end it. I appreciate you being here and sharing your wisdom, your journey, and giving us some insight and some tips and tricks. And hopefully there's somebody out there listening who maybe they were at a place where they didn't really understand what they were experiencing or going through. And hopefully this sheds some light for them so that they can start to embody and embrace this very truth about them in a positive way.
Thank you so much.
That's a wrap. First episode of 2022 in the books. Do you have any specific guests that you would love to hear from in the new year on this show? Or any requests on a specific topic that you would like to learn more about? Or maybe you have an interest in sharing what you've learned along the way on your journey, either by yourself or even on a panel with other people, so it doesn't feel so like spotlights all on me. These are options. If you do have any requests, suggestions, or you would like to be a part of the show in any way, please check out my website and email me with these requests or suggestions, and I will do my best to make it happen. Have fun with your goal transformations, and as always, until next time, make this week great. I'm your host, Chas Smith.